Hello everyone, welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we're going to hear a story about a major issue in the narrative. My sister's lack of independence, responsibility, and her stubborn attitude towards life's challenges, along with a family conflict on how to handle these problems. Today's story will take you through a surprising situation. My sister's stubbornness in refusing to change, despite facing consequences and family intervention. She still doesn't realize that she needs to change, making all of our family's efforts seem in vain. If you find this story interesting and full of meaningful lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to learn more valuable lessons. Yesterday, while scrolling through YouTube, I happened to come across a video related to my previous post, and that's when I realized I hadn't updated you all with the latest information. So today, I'd like to share some new updates about the bicycle I mentioned before. To start, there's some good news. My bike is still fine, nothing too serious happened. Although I was a bit worried about its condition before, it turns out I was lucky enough to avoid any major issues. Specifically, I was quite concerned about the possibility of it rusting or getting clogged after my sister accidentally dropped it into a pond. At that moment, I thought the bike would be severely damaged, especially since it was no longer new and probably couldn't handle such impact. However, after carefully inspecting it, I discovered that the bike still worked pretty well. Since it fell into the water, the bike hasn't made any unusual noises, which relieved me greatly. Though I had feared that some parts might have been damaged from being submerged for so long, luckily, this bike is a simple one-speed cruiser, not too complex in design. Therefore, even after being submerged in water, it still maintained pretty good performance. After it dried off, I applied oil to the necessary parts to reduce friction and protect the components. Specifically, I greased the wheel bearings, which helped the bike run smoother and prevented jamming or early damage. Moreover, after a few months of use, I also replaced the inner tubes and tires, as they had worn out and no longer held up as well as they did at the start. After the replacement, the bike was back in great condition, and I continued using it for my daily rides. That's all I wanted to share in this update about my bike. Despite a few small incidents, everything is still fine, and I feel reassured about continuing to use it. As for my sister, her story hasn't been easy. Recently, she finally accumulated enough credits to graduate from college, an admirable achievement, but the journey to this success wasn't smooth. Throughout her studies, she often tried to blame me and her psychological issues, particularly the difficulties related to the bike, for her low grades and poor academic results. She believed that the depression and stress from the bike accident were the reasons she couldn't focus on her studies. However, the truth is that, despite her many excuses, my parents no longer accepted those justifications. Finally, after patiently caring for her for so long, my parents couldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. They decided to be stricter with her and began applying strong disciplinary measures. Whenever she fell into a negative state, organizing a pity party, or getting angry for not achieving the desired results, my parents insisted that she sit in her study room and focus on her work. They bluntly threatened to cut off the Wi-Fi and turn off her phone if she didn't do her homework. At first, my sister was very upset and cried, even saying she hated my parents for making these tough decisions. However, after some time, she began to realize that this was the only way for her to overcome herself. She gradually stopped her negative behaviors and eventually started to comply with my parents' demands. And then, she graduated. Although it was a huge achievement, the graduation ceremony wasn't the joyful time we had expected. We went out together to celebrate her, but something strange happened. She wasn't happy at all. Looking at her eyes, I could see emptiness and sadness. The reason was that, throughout her college years, she had lost all her friends. She had hoped that after graduation, she could throw a fun party with her old friends to relive the memories. However, things didn't turn out as she expected. Her friends had completely cut ties with her long ago, not for any other reason but because she could no longer maintain healthy relationships, and had become someone very different from who she was before. Her irresponsible actions, negative attitude, and pity parties had turned her into a spoiled child in the eyes of her friends and everyone around her. Although I feel some regret and sadness about what happened, I realized that my sister's change and graduation were a major step forward. She learned to face herself, gradually taking responsibility for her actions and accepting the consequences of them. However, despite overcoming that difficult journey, she still has to face great losses, especially when she has no one to share the joys of graduation with. I hope that in the future, she will find a way to make peace with her past so that she can continue on her path to maturity more strongly. With humorous forms of punishment, my parents started requiring my sister to ride a bike instead of using other transportation methods. This was truly a decision she wasn't happy with, and she hated it even more than having to take the bus. The bike she had to ride was an old cruiser that my dad bought for her, which wasn't an ideal bike for someone who had no interest in physical activities. However, my parents were adamant that this would be the best way for her to get out of the house for a bit, so she wouldn't spend all day in her room, wallowing in negative emotions. Although this wasn't something my sister wanted, my parents almost begged me to help take her on bike rides on weekends, to give her some outdoor time and get away from the family tensions. And I, though not really wanting to, complied with their request. The only reason I did so was because my parents promised to take me out for dinner, a reward I couldn't refuse. However, this wasn't the only time I had to intervene in my sister's matters. There were times when I felt exhausted from having to do these things just because my parents asked, but I continued to do it for the sake of family harmony. The last time we talked about this, my sister still insisted that she was right and argued that eating in the hospital was wrong, although she couldn't explain why when anyone asked her about it. Honestly, no one supports her anymore. Everyone in the family believes she's clinging to an unfounded theory, and even my parents admitted that they no longer see the issue as unusual, especially after discovering that the hospital's cafeteria is actually a business completely separate from the hospital. Despite that, my parents still wanted my sister to change her perspective, and they decided to set an example for her. They not only tried to persuade her, but also took her to have lunch at the hospital several times to prove that it's not a bad place. During those visits, my sister always appeared very restless and uncomfortable. She clearly couldn't believe that my parents were forcing her to do something she felt was completely wrong. She reacted as if it were a religious issue, and her resistance became stronger. There were times when she cried, and the feeling of helplessness was evident on her face, but my parents were determined that she needed to mature and face reality. What made me feel sorry was that my sister could only hold on to that belief because she would have to admit she was wrong if she did otherwise, and she didn't want to do that. There were times I wondered if she was just a spoiled child or if she was a narcissist, someone who only thinks of herself and can't view things objectively. However, I realized that I didn't have the expertise to make a judgment on this, and honestly, it's not my place to do so. The only thing I know is that she's going through a tough phase of growing up, and although at times I feel disappointed, I still hope she will recognize the value of change and become more self-aware. After all, accepting mistakes and learning from them is crucial for us to become stronger in life. My sister's friends eventually abandoned her, and the reason wasn't just because of the events surrounding my bicycle, but also because they no longer had the courage to face the consequences of their actions, in which they were involved. In fact, at least 2 of those friends directly participated in the plan to steal my bicycle and throw it away, a thoughtless act that caused significant trouble for the group. When this was discovered, they were all criticized and condemned from various sides. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, the group quickly blamed everything on my sister, isolating and ostracizing her. They hoped that by doing this, they could save their reputations and avoid legal or social consequences. Although I didn't report the theft of my bicycle to the police, the 2 girls involved got into big trouble with their families. This was part of the punishment they faced. The minivan they used for transportation, which was a key part of their plan, turned out to be borrowed from one of their parents. After finding out the truth about what happened, these parents decided to stop allowing the girls to use the minivan. They even came to me to apologize on behalf of their daughters and asked me to provide a copy of the video documenting the incident. I agreed and gave them the video, because I thought it was the right thing to do, and also a way for the parents to realize their children's actions. Even though the girls were completely complicit in stealing my bicycle, my sister's friends chose to place all the blame on her. Not only did they turn their backs on her, but they also put her in an awkward situation in front of everyone. Maybe now my sister understands what it feels like to be a scapegoat, as all she had to endure was loneliness and criticism from people who were once close friends. To this day, she has no one to talk to or share her joys and sorrows with, because those same friends have cut ties with her and no longer want to continue their relationship with her. This situation not only caused my sister pain, but also made her the target of ridicule from those around her. One of the things that made her most uncomfortable was having to ride a bicycle to university every day, something she found extremely embarrassing and inconvenient. After my parents decided that cycling would be cheaper than taking the bus, my sister had no choice but to accept this reality. Even though the bicycle wasn't stolen or damaged, my sister simply hated it and saw it as a punishment she had to endure. The situation became even worse as she had no friends to accompany her on the long trips to school. As part of a plan to teach my sister independence, my father forced her to learn how to fix and maintain her bicycle. When he was younger, my father worked with bicycles, and although he no longer used them, he kept the necessary repair tools. Therefore, he knew very well how to maintain and fix minor issues on a bicycle. My father passed down his basic knowledge of bicycle repair to me, and now he wanted my sister to learn the same, so she could become more independent and not rely on others when something went wrong with her bike. Through all these events, my sister could learn many valuable lessons, even though they weren't always pleasant. She not only learned how to face her responsibilities but also had to figure out how to stand firm in difficult situations. The story of the bicycle may be a small part of life, but it's a clear testament to the fact that each person has to face the consequences of their actions, and sometimes they must overcome challenges to grow up. For those who once predicted that my sister would do crazier things or even seek revenge on me for the previous incident, they may have been wrong about her. Although at first, I couldn't rule out the possibility that she would take some drastic action to retaliate, in reality, she didn't do that. Instead, she just became bitter and angry, probably due to her dissatisfaction with herself and everything around her. She was asked to attend counseling sessions to help her deal with her negative emotions and address the psychological issues she had been struggling with for a long time. And although those counseling sessions didn't immediately create a dramatic change, I noticed that at least she had shown some small improvements. She became a bit calmer, and it seemed like she was starting to think things through more carefully. However, I think that if there is any profound impact, it might take several more years for the change in my sister to become noticeable. Her old habits and negative thinking are deeply ingrained, and such change cannot happen overnight. This is not just a matter of time but also the result of a process of self-awareness and facing past mistakes. However, one positive thing is that she no longer tries to boss me around or control me as she did before. It seems she has understood that everyone has the right to make their own decisions in life and cannot impose their will on others, even family members. The relationship between my sister and me has changed slightly since my previous post, and this is clearly evident during our family dinners. My parents have invited me to dinner several times, and my sister is usually present at these meals. However, one strange thing is that she hardly says anything to me throughout the meal. In fact, I feel that she gets even more annoyed when she sees that I am completely indifferent to her attitude. Perhaps she expects me to react, or feels that my silence is a form of disregard, but in reality, I don't feel the need to change my behavior just because she feels uncomfortable. My sister has had to face criticism from everyone, even my parents no longer tolerate her. They plainly told her that she had ruined her own reputation, which made her feel more isolated and hurt. However, instead of accepting this truth, she continues to blame me, using me as a scapegoat to explain all her mistakes and failures. She can't face her own issues without finding an external reason to vent her anger. Perhaps she feels that blaming me will make her feel a little better, but it only makes the relationship between us more tense. As for me, after the bicycle incident, I decided to take some precautions. I started chaining and locking my bike every time I came home, just to ensure it wouldn't face similar problems again. It's not because I think someone will continue to steal it, but as a way to protect my property and also as a defensive reaction after the shock from my sister's actions. Although this might seem excessive, I feel that at least it gives me a sense of safety and control. Moreover, I couldn't overlook the signs of distrust that my sister created in the past. After my sister graduated from college, my parents made an important decision that she didn't expect, requiring her to move out. This decision made my sister extremely dissatisfied and publicly opposed. She felt trapped in a difficult situation and didn't want to change, because up until then, she had always been pampered by my parents and never had to take responsibility for anything. However, my parents were determined to make her find a job immediately and take care of herself. They said her playtime was over, and now was the time for her to face adult life, no longer relying on the family as she did before. Family members, from grandparents to uncles and aunts, clearly told my parents that my sister would never grow up if she didn't experience difficulties on her own, pay her own bills, and take care of herself. In reality, forcing her to change so suddenly was not easy for my parents, especially since my sister was their favorite child, pampered since childhood. But in the end, my parents realized that if they kept spoiling her, she would never learn the important lesson of independence and self-reliance in life. My sister still cannot accept this change, and she remains frustrated with my parents' decision. She still loves being pampered and living in a state of dependency. Although she cannot blame me for this because I wasn't directly involved in my parents' decision, during our conversations, she still keeps attributing all her failures to past events, especially the bicycle incident. My sister has often gotten angry and shouted, "It was just a bicycle," when trying to find an excuse to blame me when things didn't go well at university. Once, my mother had to slap her and told her to stop acting as if I was the only cause of all her problems. For me, the bicycle wasn't just a means of transportation, it was almost my livelihood, as I used it to commute every day. Therefore, I couldn't accept her treating it as just a joke. Currently, my sister lives with 3 other girls in a 2-bedroom apartment, and she had to move out to avoid the gossip about her reputation. This is not an easy step, and my mother actually cried when she saw her daughter leave the family. She now works in an office and is learning to become a secretary, but she still constantly complains about her current life. Although she tries to boast about what she will do when she earns more money than me, I simply say, "Go ahead, and don't react further." She's very upset that I won't take any stance on what she's doing, and perhaps she expects me to admit that she will be more successful than me in the future. My sister still has to ride the bicycle that my father bought for her, because she doesn't want to waste money on buses, even though the distance is just a few miles. She wants my parents to buy her a car, thinking that since she's been kicked out of the house, she deserves a car from them. However, my parents refuse, and this only makes her angrier, leading to her not speaking to them for a while. Indeed, my sister and I no longer ride bikes together anymore. That ended as soon as she moved out. In the past, on weekend bike rides, my sister would deliberately tease me childishly. She would call me dumb or special, and roll her eyes while talking to me. One of her taunts was that her bike was better than mine because it had gears, but she still couldn't overtake me. However, I didn't care about her words, and just ignored them without reacting. This seemed to make my sister even more determined to improve her physical abilities so that at least she could beat me in the future, as I think she didn't want to feel inferior to me. Financially, my sister clearly wants a car, but she cannot buy one because she's not good at saving. Although she asked my parents for an electric bike for Christmas, they refused when they saw the prices of good ones. She also made my parents spend a lot of money paying for her entire 3 years of college. For Christmas, I gave her a new set of tires for her bicycle as a joke, but she just glared at me when she received the gift. Our parents also had to help her financially a few times in 2024 because she always struggled with managing money. Although she is trying to face real life, my sister still acts like a spoiled child in denial of reality, and although she is trying to change, perhaps she's still not ready to mature. Recently, she's also shown anger that I live alone while she has to share an apartment with roommates to pay rent. I've met her roommates, and they really like me. This only makes my sister angrier, as she can't stand that people don't cater to her demands like our parents did before. She hates it when others don't do as she wishes, and perhaps living with roommates who cannot meet those demands is a nightmare for her. And that's all that has happened so far. Although my sister is still trying to find independence, perhaps she still has a long way to go before truly maturing and learning to take care of herself. My sister's story is a challenging journey of growing up, of learning to face reality and accept the consequences of her actions. Although she has gone through significant transitions, from having to take care of herself to learning how to stand on her own, it's clear that she's still on a long path to understanding that life is not always as she wants it. My parents' decisions, though seemingly harsh, were necessary preparations for her to realize that she couldn't always rely on others. Sometimes, the challenges and difficulties in life are the only way for us to truly mature, understand more about ourselves and the people around us. Maturity doesn't just come from age or education, but from the ability to take responsibility for oneself and the decisions one makes. Sometimes, we have to face discomfort, changes we don't want, but these things will help us grow and become stronger. Ultimately, indulgence and reliance on others are just temporary comforts but cannot be the solid foundation for a truly independent and successful life.